Hello, welcome back to What is this weapon? This is quite an interesting one. More interesting than I think it probably looks. Because on the face of it, this is a fairly ordinary double-action revolver. Smith & Wesson Model 10. It's got the chunky rubber grip on there, which works really well actually. 4-inch barrel. Really quite a sort of workaday, but very nicely made 20th century revolver. And you know, the double action 38 caliber revolver, whether Smith & Wesson or Colt, was an absolute staple of, well, all sorts of people. Armed forces, if you go far enough back, and then police, civilian owners, you name it. This was really, as a loose type of firearm, this was an absolute standard fallback.
And again, please.
So what's special about this? Well, this is one of two that I'm aware of that were preserved deliberately, one by us and one by the Imperial War Museum, because these two revolvers were present during the trial of the two accused Lockerbie bombers at Camp Zeist. The trial itself ran from 2000 to 2002, and you may well have seen, or at least seen something about, the recent drama Lockerbie: A Search for Truth, which is a drama documentary really around who really caused that tragedy. Now, perhaps unusually, this trial was conducted on foreign soil at Camp Zeist, a military base in the Netherlands. It was conducted under Scots law, using Scottish personnel, including members of all 8 Scottish police services as they then were. They later merged into Police Scotland, but all members of all 8 were present as part of the protection detail. Every day as the trial was going on, you needed multiple armed officers guarding the gate, guarding the perimeter, to make sure that everyone involved was safe. This was a terrorist trial after all. So they were, I believe, universally armed with MP5 carbines, semi-automatic only, surefire handguards on there, and I think maybe some aim point optics on some. Typically, British Armed Police have a primary weapon and a secondary weapon, and the secondary weapon for most of them was a Glock 17, because most of the armed officers in the UK had then switched over to the Glock 17, pretty much standardised upon it. However, Dumfries and Galloway themselves, so they were the force with jurisdiction over this, and they were actually doing the investigation and providing most of the evidence and everything, and organising, I believe, as well, the protection details. And their officers were armed with, as a secondary weapon, the Model 10, specifically the Model 10-11. So the -11 was the latest model introduced at that time in 1997. Perhaps the most obvious difference is, we can get in there, we can show you the back of the trigger is really opened up. And that's because the trigger and the hammer were both made using the metal injection molding process. Just a modern manufacturing process. It's increasingly common on firearms for parts that don't need to bear a huge amount of force. It's more economical to do it. So you can see that there are chunks missing. That's just the way it's been molded. The earlier models are machined from solid, and they have a solid back to the trigger. These are just minor changes that happen over the lifespan of a firearm like this, but that's the model that they would have been carrying. And there actually are some photographs. Most of the photographs and the footage actually show officers with Glock 17s and MP5s, but you will see a few officers who must be Dumfries and Galloway, and they have just about see the butt sticking out of their holster. Never had to be drawn in anger. They were there if they needed them. Now, you might have noticed this is really in spectacular condition. We'd expect military and police weapons to be quite dinged up and worn from years of service. And this is a type. The Model 10 was in service from 1974, when it was approved for use for armed officers across Britain, Great Britain at least, all the way through to, well, it depended when individual services moved over to self-loading pistols, but late 80s, 90s, yeah, and Dumfries and Galloway were one of the last forces to move from a revolver to a self-loading pistol. But yeah, this one is in really good condition, and that's the result of it having been purchased in 1999, made in 1999, in fact. 1999 is when they were preparing for this trial at Camp Zeiss. Most of that year, I gather, was involved in setting the place up, getting everyone that needed to be there, organising the armed details, that kind of thing, security. So this is effectively purchased for the trial. And then this is out of service, well, certainly by 2003, because that's when it's gifted to us. So let's say 1999 to 2003. So one of the shortest lived service weapons that I think we have, or at least that we know about. We do have on here, speaking of service, this printed, like electronic printed, like a Dymo, but a bit more sophisticated. So a sophisticated Dymo label maker. I believe that's an Armoury tag for the police armoury that this would have resided within. So weapon number 178, at least as far as we know. Now, thankfully, they didn't actually have to use these, but if they had, how effective was this kind of thing? Well, you know, this design goes back to 1899, and it was in fairly continual military or police. It used to be called the military and police model, in fact. Fairly continual, serious fighting use for a century. In the UK police forces, as I say, mid-1970s to end of the millennium, basically. And they were substantially more capable than what they replaced, which was the military Enfield revolver. It wasn't the only type in service. It did depend on which police service you were in. But the standard, as far as there was a standard, was the old Enfield 38. So this in 38 Special, and I don't know if the load might even have been a plus P or a plus P plus, I don't know that, but it was 38 Special. Just that alone is ballistically far better than the old 38 Smith & Wesson 38-200 that was used in the lighter and smaller Enfield revolvers that they had before. But this, you only got 6 shots, of course, standard 6-shot cylinder compared to 17 in a Glock 17. But the 38 Special wasn't a slouch. It was deemed adequate for police forces around the world for a very, very long time. So had they had to use it, it would have been capable of the job. The rounds at the time, I believe, would have been 125 grain semi-wad cutter, with a flat nose at least. That's the description that we have. There is a book, by the way, by Frederick Wilkinson, called Those Entrusted with Arms. It was published by us a long time ago now. I'm not sure it's necessarily available, but if you can get it, it's an interesting read. And that does briefly cover these in British police service. So this is one of those pieces in the collection where we have a lot of them. Well, actually, don't have that many Model 10s, but we have several of them. But this one is there very much for its story, for its human story, its the politics, the social history of the people who suffered when that aircraft exploded and rained down on a community. So it's an artifact of that incident and that very long-running piece of politics and human suffering at the end of the day. And it's also representative of the very last gasp of the revolver in British police service. Thanks for watching, guys. We really appreciate it. As always, like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. Check out our website for any events. And actually, we do have some fun stuff coming up. So we have a Call of Duty live stream, Team Royal Armouries against Team Cody Firearms Museum. So keep an eye out for that. The details will be in the description. Now, we do have a bit of a ringer in Team Armouries, and that is our friend Dave Jewett, who also has some very exciting news to announce, that he and his colleagues are starting a new channel called EXP. And one of the things on there is going to be involving me again, doing the Expert Reacts material that a lot of people enjoyed quite a bit previously. So that's coming back, basically, along with some other exciting stuff that they're going to be doing. So whatever you do, join us again here next week.